Don't cry for me, Argentina. The truth is I never left you. All through my wild days, my mad existence, I kept my promise. Don't keep your distance.
Hace 5 años, el 19 de mayo de 1976.
Como beber, revivir da marca, devagarado, ouvir a labuta, mesmo calado, o carece peito, silêncio na cidade não se escuta, de que me vale ser filho da santa, melhor seria ser filho da outra realidade menos morta, tanta mentira, tanta força bruta. Pai, afasta de mim esse cálice, pai, afasta de mim esse cálice, pai, afasta de mim esse cálice de vinho tinto de sangue. Como é difícil acordar calado, se na calada noite eu me damo, quero lançar um grito desumano, que é uma maneira de ser escutado. Esse silêncio todo me atordoado, eu permaneço atento, na arquibancada, a qualquer momento, ver emergir o monstro da lagoa. Afasta de mim esse cálice, pai, afasta de mim esse cálice, pai, afasta de mim esse cálice de vinho tinto de sangue. Dime tu gorda, porque já não anda, dime tu sabe, que já não gosta.
Uh-oh, there goes my clothes.
I had gone to these countries because friends of mine who were here, exiled from mainly Argentina and Chile, had suggested this might be a good time for me, that there was enough openness as compared to a number of years ago for me to sing, speak out, and I had hoped to do those things. It turned out to be a very different story.
It's a great pleasure to have you here in Buenos Aires after having met in Madrid at the Conference for Disarmament and Human Rights. And here you come to learn about our reality. I always say that Latin America lives between anguish and hope. And I thank you.
This man gets death threats every day on the phone. That's Peres Esquivel. And he's a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and one would think that there would be a certain amount of respect for him and his family and his kids, and he's terrified. Well, they don't want him there, but he was born there, and he lives there, and he does what they don't like, and he's already been in prison, he's already been tortured. There's nothing left except for him to go on fighting, and that's a strange kind of life to be living. You're working for human rights, you're working for families to get back together, children who've been gone for 5 years to come home, or proof of their death. That's his daily work,
These days, they are developing a campaign on the radio, and many people have heard it, against me, because of Joan's presence here.
Because of Joan's presence here.
I think Joan's presence in Argentina is very valuable, and the preoccupation of the government of not allowing her to sing is also very important. Because it's one thing that in the United States they hear many things about Argentina, but it's something else when somebody like Joan comes to Argentina and she feels so restricted, so limited, and prevented from doing anything. So it's a way of showing clearly to the North American people what really is happening in Argentina.
My experience in Argentina, as far as being followed, as far as getting paranoid, as far as understanding a very different way of life, was absolutely unique to me. I had never experienced anything like that in any other country in the world. From being greeted with tear gas at a human rights meeting, to being followed 24 hours a day by 2 cars full of people who claim to be our security, to being literally kicked out of the hotel we were staying in with some very feeble excuses about the hotel being filled up, which of course it never was just probably giving me some iota of what it must be like for people who have had their liberties taken away from them.
What practical situation do you see to solve the problem of the disappearance?
You're speaking just of here in Argentina.
Solamente in Argentina?
I think what I prefer to do is collect everything I can see and go as many places as I can, and then when I go home, see how I relate the problems to the United States, which is where I have to work.
Dice que lo que pretende hacer es, bueno, juntar toda la información que pueda.
We tried to have a press conference in Adolfo's office, and there was a bomb threat, which turned out to be a real bomb. The bomb squad came, and we moved all of what we were doing down the street to a cafe. We couldn't understand the internal things happening, but we had to put our trust in somebody. Adolfo had asked us to Argentina. He was responsible for our lives, and in a sense, we were somewhat responsible for his.
Above us, only sky.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the KCBS News Magazine. Joan Baez singing Imagine. She is here with us today on the News Magazine. This hour, we're going to be talking about her recent trip to South America. Joan Baez, this was not one of the easier trips you've taken recently to talk about human rights.
Oh, it's certainly one of the more interesting trips that I've ever taken. I think we didn't assume there would be that big a problem.
Don't you think that a performer who's known worldwide as a pacifist going into countries that do have records of human rights violations and oppression of their people, that would be creating a record?
Well, as it turned out, that's certainly the way they felt, and that was expressed very clearly to me.
What was the message that you were trying to take to South America? What did you want to do there?
What I really wanted to do was sing, to give a regular concert, because that's my gift is my singing voice, and then slip in something. Say, in Argentina, just say one thing. Say, this song is dedicated to the families of disappeared citizens. And I thought, well, maybe that'll get me in trouble, but if I say it just right and I don't heavy-hand it, then it will have been worth the trip down there.
You mentioned the disappeared citizens, and we know the story of Jacobo Timmerman, the man who was the Argentinian newspaper man who was jailed for a couple of years for supposedly printing the names of all the people who disappeared. Did you see any evidence of that when you were in Argentina?
Yeah, we spent our entire time with families of disappeared citizens. Since I didn't have official concerts, and since it then was clear that I was being categorized with the underdogs of Argentina, I spent my whole time with them. My program in Argentina amounted to going to, say, visit the Madres de Plaza de Mayo, and they would take out their handkerchiefs, and I would take out my guitar, and I'd play and sing to them, and they would weep. And they would weep over their children who'd been gone, say, anywhere from 4 years to 7 years. And some of them would have 3 young people had been picked up in the slum, or been picked up at the university, or been taken from the house, and they never hear from them again. Those women are asking for proof of the death of their child, or to see the child alive again.
There's something that I think must be understood, particularly about the Argentine and the Chilean cases, but it's true of Brazil also. All of these military governments, each in its own way, with slight differences, but nevertheless all of them determined that they were, in their own words, going to extirpate, cut out the cancer of Marxism or leftism or communism. It was called various things at various times. What did this mean in effect? It meant that anybody who was suspected of being with the left, anybody who was suspected of helping someone who was with the left, anyone, in fact, who was a family member and therefore might be able to provide information about someone who was suspected of being with the left or suspected of helping someone with the left, was under suspicion. Not only under suspicion, but very often brought in for interrogation. At that point, tortured, because torture was an ordinary and everyday part of these interrogations. And once the persons were tortured, and in many cases maimed and damaged almost beyond recognition, it only made sense within this crazy, obscene logic simply to kill them.
Hace 5 años, el 19 de mayo de 1976.
You couldn't do anything with one of these persons. You couldn't take someone that you had tortured almost to death and release them back out into public life, because sooner or later, obviously, they would tell, or it would be obvious what happened to them.
The mothers and relatives of the disappeared have demonstrated every Thursday since 1977 in the Plaza in front of the government palace. The first Thursday we were there, the women were told to go to the Ministry of Justice, where they would receive news of their sons and daughters. Once again, they were turned down, and their frustration and anger was evident.
Con el nombre de desaparecidos.
Que tengan la valentía de decir que han hecho con nuestros hijos, con esto. Si no estaríamos orgullosas, no estaríamos en la calle buscándolos. Cada vez más orgullosas, cada vez más.
One feels a lot of diminished self-importance when you're around people like the mothers. I mean, that's just a joke to talk about my sorrow or my frustration or, gee, it must have been hard, Joan, you didn't get to sing. That's all nonsense. I mean, nothing compared to what those mothers lived through all day long and all night long. I don't count.
Yo no puedo pensar que mi hija no viva.
I cannot think my daughter is not alive.
Es una lucha. Me doy
It is a
cuenta
struggle.
que siempre tengo
I realize that in my mind I keep moving from, is she or isn't she?
O que no está. Porque si no estuviera,
because if she is not alive,
la han matado en frío.
I must admit that they killed her in cold blood, and that I resist.
Pero de noche,
but at night,
sobre todo las noches de tormenta,
especially stormy nights,
despedirme de su retrato,
after saying good night to her picture,
la mente
the mind
es un desfile de imágenes
is a parade of images that one does not know what to do with.
Que si sufrió,
did she
que
suffer?
Si la
was she tortured?
Que vejámenes
was she abused?
¿De dónde está?
Where
Porque
is
las
she?
noticias que nos llegan de lo que es ese
because the news we get of that hell is horrible.
Entonces es un desfile.
So it is a parade of images of things that come and go.
Y es muy difícil.
And it is very hard to accept all of that.
That we're saying that some people felt the time was right for a coup.
The government of Isabel Perón had run its course. There was so much chaos in the country. There were riots in the streets. There were terrorist acts. People were afraid to go out at night. Inflation was running at the time of the coup at almost 1,000% a year. One can play with the figures any way you want to. There's no way to cut it other than the fact that there was pure chaos around. And a lot of people, many Democrats, many Peronists, were ready for someone to come in and change the situation. The difference is they didn't know that this time they were dealing with a military that came in with a very different set of preconceptions, with a very different goal. The costs were high, and I don't think the costs were justified. The costs were some 6,000 to 15,000 people have disappeared and are probably dead. And the costs are many thousands more who were just outright dead and claimed as dead in this guerrilla war between the leftist terrorists and the government. And clearly many of the people who were disappeared probably never deserved in any way to be killed. They may have been college students who were no more than your average liberal college student in the States.
El 24 de diciembre de 1975.
On the 24th of December, 1975,
que en ese momento tenía
my daughter Noni, who was 24 years old,
fue secuestrada por un jeep del ejército.
Was kidnapped by an army jeep at 10 in the morning
en la villa donde ella era maestra.
From the poor neighborhood where she was a literacy teacher.
Yo la busqué.
I looked for her.
Hice todas las gestiones que pude. Me comuniqué con
and talked to many people.
Pero recién el 8 de enero.
But it was only on the 8th of January, 1976, in courtroom number 8 of La Plata.
Me avisaron que mi hija había muerto.
That they told me my daughter had died.
Como prueba, ellos
as
me
proof,
entregaron
they offered to give me as identification jar number 28 with Noni's hand in it.
Como identificación. Yo hice un juicio por asesinato al ejército. Ahí mismo en el
I felt so impotent, all I could do was sue the army for murder. I believed that by suing the army for murder, I could stop the wave of persecutions that had started in Argentina.
La respuesta a este juicio por asesinato,
the answer to my suit against the army
vino primero con la muerte
was first
de Adrián Saidón.
The death of my son-in-law, Adrián Saidón.
Luego el secuestro
and then the kidnapping
mi ex marido
of my ex-husband
de junio del 76.
On the 11th of June, 1976.
Él es un enfermo cardíaco grave, bioquímico.
He was a biochemist and very ill at the time.
Él estaba siendo cuidado por una enfermera, una chica chilena.
He was being cared for by a Chilean nurse.
Despliegue de fuerza.
The army came with a big show of force.
Chica chilena,
they covered the nurse's mouth and tied her to a chair.
Y cuando se enfrentaron con mi marido,
when they confronted my husband, they asked, how did he, a shitty Jew, dare to sue the army for murder?
The dirty word in Argentina is Nuremberg. And any good politician knows that if he wants to get the military to step down peacefully, then he's going to have to try and coax them a little bit and not set up a situation where they fear that there are going to be all these investigations as to what happened to the disappeared, why, who killed them, what was the name of the captain or the major or the colonel. And there are a lot of captains and majors and colonels out there who are putting a lot of pressure on these generals in the junta to keep him from opening up this issue.
You were just saying that the real question is, what do the Argentine people think?
That's a question I've been unable to answer. How many people support the mothers in the Plaza de Mayo? Who knows? They don't come out to march. They don't come out to watch. They don't clap. They stay away. Are they afraid? There's a tremendous paranoia in this country.
¿Qué le parece a usted esto de las madres de la Plaza de Mayo?
Sí, parece muy bien. ¿Por qué? Ahora, ¿qué es lo que pide la madre? No sé, la verdad no sé.
Ellos piden que se les entregue una lista o los desaparecidos con vida.
Ah, de eso no les sé decir nada. No les sé decir propiamente nada sobre eso. Sí, porque yo ignoro del asunto. Ahora que la madre pide su derecho, lógico, está bien.
¿Es justo lo que piden?
Y su derecho de madre.
¿Usted está de acuerdo con lo que sucedió?
No, ignoro todo eso lo que usted me está diciendo, por eso me estoy preguntando de usted. La verdad que no sé.
¿Existe una gran ignorancia en el pueblo argentino respecto a eso?
Prácticamente no. Acá todo el mundo entra y sale sin ningún problema.
¿Existe libertad entonces para decir cualquier cosa?
Sí. Acá nadie le dice nada.
¿No hay censura?
No.
There are two kinds of censorships. One censorship is having a little colonel in your office telling you you can write this and you can't, which is, for me, quite acceptable. At least you know where you are. It's an inhibition, it's an obstacle, but at least you know its shape. The other kind of censorship is in which there is a state of complicity between the press and the government, self-censorship, in which you are aware that certain things might displease the government, so you don't write them. You are aware that certain areas are regarded as sensitive, so you walk to the other side. And so, really, without quite knowing it, you become just another government official. You're not paid by the government. You're not beholden to the government in theory, but you do establish a relationship with that government in which what you are doing is becoming an unpaid propagandist for it. And it's this second form of censorship which is far more insidious, far more corrupting, which has become almost a way of life for many, many journalists in Buenos Aires, and which also affects to a certain extent the foreign press here. Because, well, they're good, hard-hitting, say-it-as-it-is newsmen, but they don't want to be thrown out of the countries. So they tend to blur the facts a bit. They tend to give officials the benefit of the doubt.
Y por todos los hijos del mundo. Me voy a arrastrar, aunque sea arrastrando me voy a venir. Pero no voy a dejar de venir. Cuando me muera yo vendrán mis nietos. Cuando no vendrán mis nietos, vendrán mis tataranietos. Pero van a venir, aunque sea la única. Han de aparecer primero. Porque esto no es posible que en la Argentina suceda.
Desarmar tu historia antigua y a pedazos volverte a conquistar. Una ciudad quiero tener para todos, construida y que alimente a quien la quiera habitar.
la oí cantar.
That originally I came to Latin America on a concert tour and have been unable so far to give an official concert in either Argentina or Chile, but this has made my life a lot richer in the people I've met and the things that I've done. However, the question still remains is whether I will be able to give an official concert, which I would like to do. The only thing my office can say is that 3 promoters who were originally very interested, 4 promoters, changed their minds, and I don't think it was for economic reasons.
La gestión nuestra como empresarios.
What we did as promoters was limited to asking officially if there was a prohibition regarding Joan Baez. The truth is that there is no prohibition. There's nothing official on this, but there is something characteristic of the communication media at this time, which is self-censorship. So TV producers and promoters fall into this climate of fear of a prohibition that may come at any time.
The human rights problem in Chile, of course, begins in 1973, specifically on September 11th with the military coup, when the military takeover, Allende is killed defending his government, and very, very substantial bloodbath began in September of 1973 and continued really quite intensively for between 2 and 3 years in Chile, with the physical elimination and, of course, the torture, the exile, the incarceration of tens of thousands of Chileans. So the human rights problem in Chile, although it derives from the overthrow of Allende, is in no way due to Allende. It's due, of course, to the military takeover.
The horror still goes on after 8 years. There's been an economic model implanted in my country that is supposed to reverse all the gains of the working class and all the power and the benefits of society are given to a small group again. There's been constant persecution to the people that try to keep the real values of the Chilean people. That has been done with the most terrible repression. And we have seen that happening through burning of books, killing of poets, singers, expelling writers, artists, because culture is the roots of the people. And it keeps the spirit alive, the democratic spirit of the people of Chile.
Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me ha dado el oído que en todo su ancho cada noche y día.
In most countries, when repression hits, journalists, artists, dancers, intellectuals are either subdued to some degree or in serious repression, simply snuffed out one way or another because they're a threat. They're a threat because of their minds and because of their background of exhibiting freedom, personal freedom. And they're a real threat under a dictatorship. and all these people, relatively young people, singing the songs that they've written, most of the songs verging on freedom songs, really expressing themselves openly. When one does that in situations like the three countries we're talking about, it is a danger to them. In a sense, the smiling faces, the beautiful music, the cheering, the clapping is somewhat deceptive. I had learned fear by then, by the time we had gotten to Chile, and there were 2 or 3 busloads of armed police surrounding the building that we were having this concert in. And none of us knew what was going to happen, but the exuberance of the people is glorious, and I think they need that to stay alive, but it really is covering up the constant underlying fear.
Sí, es verdad. Gracias. Imagine there's no heaven. Easy if you try. No heaven below us. Only sky. Imagine all the people. Imagine all the people living for today. Living for today. Imagine there's no country. Will be hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for. And no religion to imagine all the people. Imagine all the people living life in peace. Living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. But I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us. I hope someday you'll join us. And the world will be one. And the world will be one.
We went to visit the slums, and the slums are in the outskirts of Santiago. In these areas, only about 1/3 of the workforce is employed now, and those who are employed receive about half of the pay they received in 1972. In this particular daycare center, the Catholic Church has assumed responsibility for helping the mothers take care of these kids. They told me that in Chile, almost half will drop out of school by 3rd grade, and 1 child out of 10 will live by begging.
En nuestra sociedad, uno de los grandes marginados son los niños, uno de los grandes discriminados. Y más aún en este medio, donde las carencias, las necesidades y los problemas son mucho mayores que en otros. Creemos que la paz se construye, y se construye luchando día a día, tratando de crear condiciones más justas para que los hombres vivan mejor, para que nuestros niños vivan mejor y algún día sean mejores. Y sean no el arquitecto de su destino, sino que sean el arquitecto de una sociedad mejor.
You're listening to the KCBS News Magazine. I'm Lila Peterson. My guests this hour on the News Magazine, Joan Baez and Jeannie Murphy. Joan Baez, as you know, is the president of Humanitas International. Jeannie Murphy is the executive director. You were talking about Brazil and the trouble you had there once you got on stage. You couldn't sing, but you could talk.
Well, Brazil was kind of the strangest for us because the image of Brazil, which it itself is trying to project, is one of democratization, liberalization, and we felt that it was very strange that they should interfere. First of all, the commercial concerts, which were already lined up, and I had gotten a work permit from the government, and we thought that Brazil would somehow be different from Argentina or Chile.
Como beber, sa beber da marca, tragar a dor, engolir a labuta, mesmo calado, pouca resta peito. Silêncio na cidade não se escuta.
The 5 official concerts were canceled before we got to Brazil, and then there was a great hustle to try and set up other things, not as large, sort of quasi-official. Churches offered places for me to sing, but even a gathering of 3,000 people, which had already been planned for other musicians and to which I was invited, a situation similar to the one in Chile, was stopped by the police a half an hour before I was supposed to leave the hotel. You don't want to explain why you came to the room. You don't want to explain just why you came to the room.
E a veiculação que saiu nos jornais que haveria um show, então isso aí não houve entrada do pedido na censura, acredita ter esse momento? Então foi feita essa comunicação, que ficaria na perspectiva de ser suspenso.
And so then went to the hall and finally went out and explained to the audience that I could not sing, that the police in Brazil had told me I could not sing publicly. And the response was interesting. Half of them laughed, you know, like, oh, not this again. And some of them were angry, and some of them wanted me to sing anyway, you know. But in doing so, I would have jeopardized any one of the 3,000 people sitting in that auditorium. And I was begged by certain members of the group who was putting on that evening's concert, please don't sing, please don't sing. So I knew it was, once again, very serious business. So I didn't sing from the stage, and then we waited, I think about a half an hour, went out in the audience and sat down, and everybody sang. In relation to my own trials and tribulations in Brazil, in a sense, it really must be looked at in perspective, which makes it somewhat of a joke. That there's never been any explanation from anybody of why the government apparently was so afraid of what I might say or what I might sing in Brazil that such great lengths seemed to be taken to stop me from singing in public. there's never been an answer or a real reason, a credible reason given to me of why this took place. And this was added to by the fact that Brazil has a completely open press. And the completely open press met with me many times, and I would ask them, what's really going on here, and what's so frightening about what I would sing, especially because I could say anything, which of course I did. In 1980 in Brazil, 120,000 metal workers brought the factories of Brazil to a standstill, and one of the main organizers of the strikes is Luis Ignacio da Silva, known as Lula. My interest in Brazil and in Lula is that the changes he's managed to bring about for the working people in Brazil has been done without the use of arms or force, through tactics that do not resort to violence.
I was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison in connection with the strikes of 1980. The government claims that there was a collective disobedience of laws. And we understand that between disobeying laws and doing a just and legitimate act, we choose the just and legitimate act. The national security law came with the pretext of preserving our country. But in reality, the national security law has become a national insecurity law because all of the people are afraid of it. Just because of a strike, union leaders can be prosecuted under the national security law. Any public demonstration can be put under the national security law. All of this will show you that there is no liberalization in this country, that what the government is sponsoring is a false liberalization. It is a liberalization made to suit the interests of the elite and not the interests of all society. I don't believe in a liberalization granted by the government. I believe in a liberalization created by the people.
Queria saber como é que ela define, então, essa passagem dela pelo Brasil.
How do you define your trip through Brazil?
Fascinating.
Fascinante.
And I think maybe good for Brazil.
Eu acho talvez muito bom para o Brasil.
That some Brazilians who hadn't thought about censorship maybe will have to think about it.
And do you intend to come back? Do you intend to come back?
That's probably more up to Brazil than it is to me now.
What are you going to do with all this information now that you've gone to Latin America and you've seen things there for yourself?
What we're doing today, among other things, I mean, just let the word out that something is amiss in South America. Something is very drastically amiss. And what we would like to say, what I would like to say is, how does the American public respond to that as Americans? And how do we feel about what we do in Latin America and where we do it and who we side with and who we support?
By the way, we contacted both the State Department and the White House to get some information from them on the trip that Joan Baez and Jeannie Murphy took, and also their stand on the human rights in South America, and we got no response from either source.
How do you really convey some of this stuff to people? And how do you do it through the news media and papers, where people just do their jobs? They pick out something sensational that you say, and maybe they print it. And now, because the subject matter is Latin America, we will get probably 1/3 of the press, and that's a very hard work. You know, I go into the city Thursday to all the TV stations which didn't come to the press conference. I'll go there. I say, call up and say, hi, remember me? The boat people? Ha ha. You know? Well, we have this other thing I want to talk about. And then they get sheepish and they say, sure, and they put you on the show. I say, will she sing? Say, sure, you give her 10 minutes, she'll talk for 7, and then she'll sing a song, and I'll sing a song in Spanish, you know, and they won't like that, but I've got to do my thing.
The reason we have her on the show is really not for her political views, although all the staff members are interested in that. Since we're an entertainment show and we follow the news, we figure that people don't want to see any more news or hear any more bad news, and so we tend to be rather uptone and light in what we do. Of course, what they wanted to do was talk about her trip and her political activities lately, and of course she can do that. Our emphasis was that we wanted her to do a song. Now, the song may be in Portuguese, we still don't know yet.
talking about in chat.
There's a lot about the United States of America that I like and that I felt freshly, because of our trip to Latin America, I felt profoundly aware of and grateful for my personal and political freedoms in this country. And what that immediately led me to was, what am I going to do with them? How do I relate those freedoms to the people in Latin America I've just left behind, who do not share those freedoms, who cannot speak out for themselves the way they'd like to, who cannot be heard? And I felt a very strong responsibility that I must follow up my trip by doing everything possible, not just the newspaper editorials and not just the Phil Donahue show, talk shows, radio. We tried to do as much of that as possible, but the follow-up would not be complete without going to Washington. We met with, say, 14 or 15 very sympathetic representatives, and we all supported each other, but then I also felt the important work was to go and try and speak with people in the State Department who obviously did not share a lot of my opinions. In fact, when we went to Washington, there was not even a human rights policy available to be talked about by the State Department. And this became very clear when the film crew and myself could not get a single person from the State Department to make a statement, and they simply said, we don't have a policy, and so we can't make a statement on our policy.
Como beber, se beber da marca, tragar a dor, engolir a labuta, mesmo calado, pouca resta peito, silêncio na cidade não se escuta, de que me vale ser filho da santa, melhor seria ser filho da outra realidade menos morta, tanta mentira, tanta força bruta, vai afasta de mim.
The basic consistency is the attitude about nonviolence, about fairness, about what we call at Humanitas seeing through both eyes, being willing to see repression in left-wing countries, right-wing countries, third-world countries. Repression is repression. A rubber hose is a rubber hose, and the beating must feel about the same, whether it's a socialist or an imperialist who's giving it. So trying to bring that to this administration is somewhat amusing in certain areas, because this administration sees more out of just one eye than many, than many before.
What the United States policy is now, under the Reagan administration, shoring up the economic elites and the military establishment in order to maintain the status quo. Now, it's a reasonable policy to be anti-revolution in Latin America, because many times revolutions cause more problems than they solve. But if you're going to be anti-revolutionary, you have to be pro-democratic, because if your democracy is the only type of government that has proved its ability to translate internal discontent into positive programs without violence. But when you support dictatorship, all you do is postpone the evil day when the people rise up and overthrow their oppressors. And when that happens, the longer you've supported the dictator, the more radical will be the outcome. Therefore, in the best interest of the United States, it makes absolutely no sense to support the Pinochets and the Somosas of this world. Instead, we should be supporting those who stand for the same values as we do.
It's an unfortunate thing that most of our allies in the effort against the Soviets, not most of them, all of them in Africa, Asia, Latin America, seem to be dictatorships with one or two exceptions. And we're stuck in that position that wanting to see a free enterprise system succeed against a communist economic system, the secret of free enterprise is stability of investment. Well, stability of an investment climate in, say, Guatemala would cause United States businessmen to say, let's have a stable government in Guatemala. Well, in practice, that turns out to end up supporting a stable government, which is also a dictatorship, which denies human rights. And we're caught in that dilemma all over the world, and I think we will continue to be caught in that dilemma.
About the time that we visited Washington, our ambassador to the United Nations, Jean Kirkpatrick, also visited Latin America, and my feeling was that what she did and said in Latin America by way of giving gifts to Pinochet and saying how much we could learn from our friendly neighbors like Chile, she was really speaking up for a few elitists and for the people in this country who will make money by selling arms to those countries.
¿Qué le pareció personalmente el presidente Pinochet?
¿Cómo me parece?
Sí.
Bueno, un hombre muy serio, muy honorable y muy agradable.
It's very difficult for me to look at pictures of anybody embracing Pinochet. And when I've spoken with the people who've lived through the tortures or who've had friends who died under torture, and those commands are given out are certainly all okayed under Pinochet. And it's a Latin American Hitler, really. For whatever the veneer or the facade, some terrible, terrible things, barbaric, ghastly tortures happen under somebody like that.
For this country's representatives to wander through a bunch of authoritarian dictatorships and say that we intend to change the law, that we intend indeed to help you with military matters, to help you politically, to have a warm, close relationship, is a disgrace to all of us.
I think that it is wrong for us to try to preach democracy as such to these governments, to try to tell them what they should do in any way, because it raises hackles and it may actually alienate. I think the most that we can do is to mildly push in directions of observation of human rights.
Now, I'm a Republican congressman, and I don't know that any pressure is being applied privately. There's certainly a way to let me know privately, hey, we're kicking them good in the tail to resolve this disappeared ones situation. And there's also a certain restraint on the flamboyance of gift giving to a Viola in Argentina or a Pinochet in Chile to not do things like that. I think we're giving the wrong signals. I frankly admit that as a Reaganite, a member of this administration. And I think if we're giving the wrong signals, then certainly we're not applying pressure privately.
When you're talking about the Latin American military, you would do well to think of the military as just another political party, only with guns, which gives them the edge. And until we adopt a policy where we discourage the military from becoming a permanent political actor and insist that any assistance that we give to the militaries of Latin America guide them towards an agreed goal of professionalism and of keeping out of the political daily life of the country, then we're simply conniving at the corruption of the political process. But there's another problem, namely that U.S. policy under the Reagan administration is, in effect, duplicating little Argentinas around the hemisphere, in Uruguay, in El Salvador, and Guatemala. And this is what worries me.
I voted to support cutting off Argentina, the Carter approach. And then I wondered if that was the right move to make when I saw them completely cut off and isolated. And as someone representing an aerospace district, when it comes to arms sales, I also have to be a realist and say, have we reduced American influence and only opened the door to French weapons with no human rights interest at all, or worse, Soviet Sukhois coming to Peru, and we cut off Israeli Kafirs to Ecuador, so now are they going to get, French weapons or even Russian weapons there? I have to be fair to American industry and say, isn't it better if we think well of ourselves as a country, a benign people, to have our influence there?
The problem is it's like prostitution. Once you're in it all, you're in. And we are going to be in that in the human rights issue, constantly balancing the pragmatism of wanting to keep countries as allies, wanting to keep a commercial flow of commerce and trade, but recognizing that it's hypocritical at every step of the way, because each one of those countries, to some degree, does something that we would not accept or countenance ourselves. And we ourselves have turned our back on human rights on enough occasions so that to speak too loudly is clearly hypocritical.
Unofficially, a State Department person said, you know, if we're going to have a human rights policy, it would be only if and when Congress insists on it. And so it goes beyond saying what is Congress going to do about it, and say how are the people going to aid Congress to do that.
If we don't hold the administration accountable to the human rights policies that are on the books, then they're going to ignore them entirely. And Congress will hold the administration accountable when it feels the public is sufficiently aroused and supportive of human rights. But it has to be developed in such a way that people can understand what that human rights policy is and why it should be supported versus what the administration's doing in pursuing foreign policy objectives that are contrary to our human rights standards.
And I don't have any illusions about it. It may be it's this hopelessly uphill battle. It may be absolutely hopeless. I mean, things have gotten so out of hand, so terrifying, so violent, so nuts, that I don't blame anybody for turning the other way and saying, hell with it. I'm going to go smoke dope and go to a rock show. I'm not going to cope with this. Why should I take my time on earth and mess it up with other people's blood? You know, I've got problems of my own. I guess in the end what I try to say to them is that it's not that it's the moral thing to do or the proper thing to do, but it's the only deep and joyous thing to do. And it has its pain, but the rewards are just immense.
It's been a very difficult week in Washington. We came here really to talk from the point of view of our small human rights group about human rights. And there are a few people who will listen, and there are a few who really would probably prefer to deprioritize human rights out of existence. And those of you who want to be heard, you have to make yourselves loud. Show me the prison. Show me the jail. Show me the prisoner whose life has gone stray. I'll show you a young girl with so many reasons why. There, but for fortune, go you or I. Show me the tavern. Show me the train. Show me the hobo who sleeps out in the rain. I'll show you a young girl with so many reasons why. There, but for fortune, go you or I.
To obtain a transcript of There But for Fortune, send $4 to PTV Publications, P.O. Box 701, Kent, Ohio, 44240. Please allow 4 weeks for delivery.